Hello and welcome. Did I scare you?
You're just so full of energy.
That's the vibe today. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the Madness and Meaning podcast. Today, we say this every time. I'm so excited for today's episode. It's such a great topic. I actually genuinely am because I feel like this is so relevant in today's world, and I don't think anyone is talking about it the way that you and I really want to share our perspective on it today. We're going to be talking about cancel culture. Um, right up in there, all day, every day, someone is getting canceled. And I genuinely, my response to it every time that I see a new person has gotten canceled, beyond just like my first petty thought of like being curious and wanting to know what happened,
Yeah.
is feeling really sad for that person, which it's interesting because I remember like very early on in my days of like being an entrepreneur and starting my own business and posting on social media. I even remember saying to one of my very first mentors, aka a mentor Amanda and I have shared, hi Laura, shout out. I remember saying to her very early on that my biggest fear was getting canceled. I was so afraid of that from the very beginning.
It's real. It's a real fear.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
the bigger you grow, it probably the bigger that fear grows too. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. Just that like mass amount of rejection all at once feels so overwhelming. Just the thought of it, it
Didn't it
feels so
happen?
overwhelming. Yeah,
You should
actually.
probably talk about that.
I can share my miniature subtle cancel story. I mean, it was more just like a lot of people hating on one particular post, and then I deleted it and nobody knew who I was, so like it was over. So
But
it
it was a
wasn't
big
like
deal.
it was a big deal to me and to my nervous
Yeah.
system. It was absolutely confronting and terrifying. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like both you and I have a similar experience of just feeling genuinely really sad and compassionate towards people that have that experience. And we want to, yeah.
I actually don't always feel that way.
Well, yeah. And you were saying that there's kind of
Yeah.
like a line
Yeah.
that, like,
Which
if
we
you
can get
cross that
into.
line, we'll get into it. Yeah. But
Yeah.
we're wanting to explore, like, first of all, like, with cancel culture, like, what is it that we're actually canceling when
Yeah.
we're quote unquote canceling someone? Why are we doing that? What is the purpose that we're trying to achieve through like this experience of canceling someone? And then also, what is the discomfort in choosing the more compassionate or forgiving approach to those types of situations?
And what is
So,
it reflecting?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Where do we start?
I would love to start with the question, what is cancel culture and what are we canceling when we're canceling somebody? Like, what does that all mean? And let's
Yeah,
just start there.
yeah. What are we you proposed that question. I was like, ooh, juicy. I can't wait to dive
Yeah.
into that. I'm not sure if I have an immediate answer, but I'm excited to explore it.
Well, cancel culture is the concept of re so revealing information comes out about somebody that they did something that is taboo, that is
Mm,
considered to be wrong by the majority of people. And because they committed that awful crime to humanity, we must cancel them so that they learn from their mistake. So
mm,
they are basically on trial in front of the world, and the world is saying you did wrong and you must pay for your sins. And whatever they hold dear is then removed. So if it's their podcast, we stop listening to their podcast. If they're on
yeah,
social media, we block and unfollow them, or we tell them how we feel in their comments, and we
yeah,
make sure they know that they were wrong and that
yeah.
this is why.
In some cases, reach out to the sponsors that are
Yes.
supporting that person and say, you need to drop this person as a representative and
Yes.
remove that person's source of income in a lot of cases as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I
Yeah.
guess that's the concept of cancel culture, but what, in your opinion, what do you, what in your opinion are we doing when we're canceling somebody? Like, what does it mean to cancel somebody?
Is it too early in the episode to go straight into projections? Because that's
No,
where
I
my
think
mind
that
went.
it's perfect opportunity.
Yeah, because ultimately, like I hold this as like such a strong, genuine truth in how I move through life. And I can understand if not everyone agrees with this, or if anyone thinks that there might be situations in which this isn't true. But up until now, I have seen that this is only true. Anytime that I or any of us are like actively triggered and like judging a quality in someone else, it's because we are rejecting that part of ourselves or a similar quality inside of ourselves. And the way that we're rejecting it can look different because for some people, it's like you're judging someone as selfish. And when you were younger, you learned it was wrong to be selfish, and maybe you got in trouble or were shamed for making quote unquote selfish decisions. And so you rejected that part of your selfishness. And you are kind of selfish, but like you try not to be, basically. And for other people, they judge someone as selfish. And when you look at them, they are like literally the most selfless person you could ever imagine. But that's because they've repressed their own needs so much and their own desires so much that they don't even really know what they are. And so they've still rejected their own sense of selfishness. It's just that it went into such an extreme that they're someone that you would never even think is selfish because they're the most selfless person that you know. And so when it comes to cancel culture, when we are seeing we're seeing someone in an experience that they've had or something that they said or something that they did in the past or whatever it is, and we are interpreting that unconsciously based on something in ourselves, something in our lives that we learned we couldn't be if we wanted to have our needs met and if we wanted to be loved and accepted. And what I think actually could be really interesting to explore, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I wonder with each cancellation, like each person that gets canceled, there must be a multitude of qualities that different people are seeing from that same experience that they're projecting. Like,
Oh,
for
interesting.
example, if the experience is, let's just say, this is a really easy example, like someone who's getting canceled said some racist things in the past. And those things were dug up. Either it was on a previous social media account or someone pulled up like a really old like Facebook post from when they were a kid or something like that. And now they're being canceled for saying horribly racist things. Some people might look at that, immediately get triggered, see that that's wrong, want to cancel that person, but the quality is that um I can imagine that some people might see that and think like the quality in them that's worthy of being judged is that they speak without thinking. So
I
they
understand what
say
you're
stuff
saying.
without thinking. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they might have had experiences where they just spoke what was on their mind. They didn't think about it, whatever. And that resulted in pain, that resulted in them getting judged, that resulted in a lot of shame. And so they had to become really hyper vigilant with the things that they say. And so when there is someone or an experience of someone being represented to them as they just said something without thinking about the consequences of it, they project that onto them. That's wrong. Don't do that. That means that you're going to be punished for that because I was.
Yeah. There's like an element of shame
Hmm.
there or guilt for what they did that they are still holding over themselves, seeing reflect back into this other individual that hasn't learned their lesson yet.
Hmm.
And it's reminding them of the pain that's still kind of simmering that they haven't forgiven themselves for. And if you can't forgive you, then you can't forgive them either, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that there's a bit of a pendulum that has to swing here, where we're coming from decades where we were not as compassionate collectively to one another. And now we're identifying the people who are still not being as quote unquote compassionate and calling them out to almost hold it over ourselves when with the guilt that we're feeling for having contributed to that ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pendulum is swinging from collectively being less compassionate to now calling out those and singling them out who don't seem to have gotten the memo yet, and being overly critical of any degree of a lack of compassion that we're seeing. And I think the pendulum is eventually going to swing back and forth a few times until we can come to a place of in the middle where we can be more compassionate throughout. And so
Yeah,
I do think that that has to happen. And I think that that's what
sure.
we're witnessing.
I just want to shine a light on the irony of that though,
Please
because
do.
people are wanting to the ultimate collective intention, it sounds like, if that's what's going on, is that we want to have a more compassionate and kind world.
I think so.
And we're
Yeah.
trying to create that, carve that out by being extremely judgmental
And
and
critical. Yeah.
and uncompassionate
I
towards
mean,
people.
again, it's the mirror,
Yeah.
right? That is the tool in the toolbox of the person that doesn't quite know yet how to access self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is
Yeah.
the way that they handle their own guilt and their own shame is through criticizing that aspect of who they once were. And so it extends out from there. But yeah, it is
Yeah.
ironic.
Yeah. And a point that you made too that I think is really interesting is that there's kind of like this purpose behind, like, if I make this person really wrong and make them punished for what they did, it will make up for something in me that I still feel guilty about or haven't forgiven
I think
myself
so.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we've all been there.
Hmm.
I can only speak for myself. I definitely have. There are memories where I was not as nice growing up to certain people, and I have so much guilt and so much shame over it. And to this day, a part of me cringes every time I think about it. And
Yes.
I almost catch myself sometimes thinking back through past Facebook. I don't have Twitter, but I had Facebook in college. Like, what did I say on Facebook that I need to go and delete? You know what I mean? Because
Yep.
it that fear is there that I will be found out as someone who is a horrible person, and here I am building a business centered around being compassionate.
Hmm.
And I think this kind of lends itself to a conversation of how do we get the pendulum to swing back again?
Yeah. How do we get the pendulum to swing back again? Because I think what what we're looking for. It's like we swung in one direction because we had a really radical intention for change, right? And now that we've reached this extreme end, maybe there's a realization happening, or more people might be realizing this, that the method isn't working. Like, we're not creating a ton of radical change that we wanted through just like ruining people's lives. There might be some change happening, there might be some wisdom inside of it, and there might be some benefits to doing it this way, but I think when the pendulum starts swinging the other way, that is our opportunity to look at, how can I extract the wisdom that collectively we learned from the process of like holding people accountable for what they did wrong, or really getting clear on what is right and wrong as well, and making sure that people know that, and all of that. How can we extract the wisdom from that and project it out into an experience that's actually going to be more beneficial collectively than just like ruining people's lives for what they did?
I have a very pessimistic idea that I want to put forward.
Let's
Do you
let's hear
think
it.
do you think that there's a semblance of joy in watching a kingdom fall?
Yeah.
I think so.
Hmm.
I think when you can watch someone that was on top fall, I think that there's something intriguing inside of that and something delicious almost that is part of what's going on here. And I would love your take on that.
Yeah. I don't know if this would be the universal experience, but I'm trying to apply it to me. And I think what would feel good about seeing someone like someone's success, someone's life crumble and fall is that if I saw a greatness in them or like a success in them that I didn't think that I'm capable of or worthy of, and then they lost it, it would feel like justifying to me.
100%. 100%. And I do think that that's also what's going on here. I think
Yeah.
that there is a conversation of the letdown that I'm seeing people exclaim when one after the other of their quote unquote idols are being found out as having this ugly past. But I also think there's a certain degree of that too going on here. Not necessarily with everybody, but when you're positively projecting onto someone or negatively projecting onto them and then have the opportunity to knock them down a peg, it can feel satisfying uh,
Hmm.
to be able to do that.
And it locks away some of our own shame from the comparison, right?
Right.
Like if we're comparing ourselves to something that we see we're not worthy of, we're not capable of, then that evokes a lot of shame. It brings up a lot of stories of I'm not good enough, I'm not capable enough, what am I doing wrong? There's something wrong with me, etc. And if we can neutralize the gap a bit between us and what we look up to, or even bring them below us in some
Yeah.
situations when we're canceling someone for something that happened, then it can give us at least like a temporary relief from the shame and maybe even a temporary like boost of our own self-worth and confidence as well. And I think that's part of it too, because if we see someone who we once saw in a really good light crumble and fall and be a victim to a lot of criticism, then there's probably a lot of room for like, well, at least I didn't do that, or at least I'm not a bad person like them, or at least I would never say something like that, or at least I know better, you know?
Or of course, you can't be a good person and be that successful, and that's why I haven't been able to do
Ooh,
what they can do, right?
that is so validating. Yes, my ego loves that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's juicy.
Mm.
So,
Ooh.
where's the line? Who do we as a society forgive and who do we cancel? How is that determined? Because there are so many celebrities that have, or they're like Teflon. They've gotten away with so many horrible things, and no one seems to really care as much. And then there are some people where it's like their career is over.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah,
you
it's
think
weird.
makes a
It's weird how we're
difference?
deciding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like how, I guess, what is the line for you and how do you determine that?
Well, that first brings forward the question of like, genuinely, how productive is it at creating positive change in the world to punish someone for their past faults? And I'm not sure I have the correct answer to that, but where my intuition leans, and this is maybe a bit more of a bias, is that we can create at least just as productive, if not more productive change with love and with compassion. And now, see, I don't know. I don't
Can
know.
you explain why? Because I agree
Yeah,
with you, but I think that there's going to be resistance from some people to bel
absolutely.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
if you could explain why you feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, look, being in the fitness industry, working as a coach, like that was my first introduction to realizing that a lot of people use the strategy of criticism and judgment and getting angry at themselves to motivate themselves to create change. And it worked in some scenarios. It got people places. It got me places as well. I changed my body a lot through self-hatred and shame and self-criticism, definitely. But I saw where that landed me. And I saw where that landed a lot of people who maybe saw outward success, but then like there was still something missing. And I also saw that for some people, it just blatantly wasn't working. Like they could be the hardest on themselves ever and beat themselves up and tell themselves that like they needed to change and they could not love themselves. They could not be okay with themselves until they changed their behavior and still not change their behavior at all. And so that was my introduction to the idea that is there other ways that we can motivate change and be productive towards an outcome that doesn't involve all of this, well, let's call it negativity, like just like criticism and hatred and anger and all of that. And in my experience, um, I'll just share for me, and this might there might be a spectrum of ways that this is experienced by different people, but when I'm being criticized or judged by something, my immediate reaction is not to change it. My immediate reaction is to get defensive for me because there's so much shame in someone seeing something in me that they don't like or seeing something that I did that they don't like, that they think could have been better. And my reaction to that shame that gets initiated or evoked from being seen in that way is so overwhelming to my system that rather than my reaction being perfectionism and needing to do the right thing and fix it, it's I need to defend why I did it that way. I need like my mind starts going into, well, they don't know what's going on in my life and that they're being too hard, like
Mhm.
defending myself in a way. Um, and so much of my brain power gets targeted at trying to neutralize the shame that I feel when I could have been using that brain power and that energy to dedicate towards a different outcome or changing something or doing something differently or learning a lesson quicker or whatever it is. And maybe eventually I get there, but I take the scenic route.
Yeah.
And I think
You,
that's an experience for a lot of people.
what's so funny is that I'm thinking to myself, I'm not criticized very often.
Hmm.
I'm not in a position, I guess, where enough people are looking at me to have that sort of a response. I've never had a post go viral before where I've had to be in front of so many different opinions of me. But I've had comments here and there. For example, our YouTube shorts are always the place where the weird comments come up for us. And when I was less conscious of who I was and of my own sense of self, definitely defensiveness was my go-to response to that, where I would project it. So rather than being internally defensive, I would nitpick and look for ways that they were wrong and they didn't know enough and I knew better, right? But now all I see is their pain.
Hmm.
What's so interesting is I have conversations with people and all I see is their inner child. It's just their pattern, their defense system, and their inner child. Like I no longer even hear what they're saying. I'm like hearing what's beneath what they're saying. I don't know if you probably have the same
100%.
experience. And so it's a completely different experience of interactions with people. And whenever someone criticizes me in a comment on a video, I don't even respond to the comment. I respond to the pain point that I'm feeling from them, which is like, wow, I can feel that what I said here really touched a nerve with you. I'm sorry you're carrying that. I hope you can find freedom from that. And that usually leads to no response at all
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that's the
or
default.
extreme defensiveness of like, I don't feel feelings and which makes no
Oh,
sense.
wow.
Um, and so, um, and getting to my point, this is a byproduct of my own self-love journey where
Yes.
I also coming from a fitness background used self-loathing and self-hatred and shame to put into action and change my physical body and my performance level, and it was very successful to a certain extent. but who I was underneath my physical body was a shell of a person.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter how much my physical body changed, and it didn't matter how strong I got or how many admiring eyes were around me when I was bench pressing double, triple my body weight. I still felt the same, which was horrible. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until I changed tactics where I gave myself permission to be more kind and compassionate to who I was that I started to be able to see people differently in my interactions with them because I was seeing myself for who I truly was and what I truly wanted and needed as a byproduct. So again, it's all a projection and it's all a reflection. And the compassionate lens offers a lot more than I think people are aware of or willing to even give um,
Yeah.
give their attention to.
And why is that so uncomfortable for people? Why are people so turned off to even think about choosing the compassionate view and instead just directly, automatically run with the judgmental and critical point of view? What is so uncomfortable about forgiveness and compassion?
What do you fear would happen if you forgave those who you previously couldn't, right? I mean, it's a
Hmm.
myriad of different answers, but if you were to turn it towards you, what do I fear would happen if I forgave my own faults?
Yeah,
If I loved myself unconditionally?
I would never change. I would be a couch potato. I would be a bad person. We attribute a lot of our quote unquote good qualities to having criticized ourselves to be there or made ourselves wrong for not being that way in the past.
I think that for me anyway, there was like a disbelief that I would feel differently. And
Hmm.
that's what drove it for me. It was like I did not believe that I could feel differently if nothing changed. And it was only through trying so hard to change things and have it never ever change
Yep,
that I was forced to just surrender and say, well, I feel like shit and I can't feel any better and nothing's changing. So why don't I just allow myself to feel good?
yep.
And that was the only way that I could access it, which I don't think is a coincidence. I think that that was part of my path. And
Uh-huh.
back to our soul connection. Hope it's
Same
the
here.
same for you. And so I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. That was just what was required.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's so fascinating how we I like how you did that where you're like, what are you afraid would happen if you forgave people for their fake for their past faults? And then what are you afraid would happen if you forgave yourself for those past faults? Like you said, there's a myriad of different answers. When it's turned on yourself, it's you would essentially lose all motivation to be a good person and to do the things that you've learned you're supposed to do to get good outcomes so that you can feel good. Right? It does come back to the outside world needs to look a certain way in order for me to feel okay inside of my life. And the way that I've learned how to make outcomes look a certain way is to control, and I control by criticizing and forcing myself to do things by being hard on myself, et cetera, et cetera. What are we afraid would happen if we forgave other people? Kind of the same thing, but just flipped on them. Like if I think it was Oprah who had this quote, but I could be wrong. We think that forgiveness is permission for people to do it again, but that's not true. Like we can forgive people and set a boundary or communicate like that's not going to work for me, right? Forgiveness is not permission for them to do it again. I think she said it's letting go of the belief that what did happen shouldn't have happened.
Yes, I think that there's a misconception that when you're forgiving someone, you're allowing their actions to be okay. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about when we talk. Maybe we should have a conversation of what we really mean by forgiving someone, because to me, it's not giving permission for their actions to have been okay. That's not what it is. It is seeing why they did it, like seeing the person behind the action,
Yeah.
knowing that they didn't know better because they didn't have the tools to know better, and operating from a place of believing that everybody shows up with the operating from the best place that they have access to,
Hmm.
and that they just literally didn't have another tool to choose. And
Yeah.
when I can see it that way, it's so much easier to have compassion, let them know that they can't do it again, and
Yeah.
forgive them for not knowing better.
Right. And I think that that can be a really hard point for people to hold on to,
Right.
especially just considering what you went through and what trauma you've experienced, etc. And I just want to highlight how much freedom there is inside of choosing that perspective, that everything that someone does, they're doing from the best level of consciousness that they've reached, the level of tools that they've learned and that they have access to at that point. They're just doing the best that they know how to do in that moment. And maybe from it, they've learned what they could do better. Maybe they haven't yet. And we don't know. We can only hope that people are going to learn and grow and also be able to acknowledge the mistakes that they made and how that affected other people and how that hurt other people, etc. Um, okay, this feels like a jumping off point to the conversation of narcissism. I'm not sure if we want to go down
Let's
that
do it.
path, but I'm just thinking because like we can acknowledge that most people are probably going to be able to learn from the mistakes they make, from the hurt that they cause others, et cetera, et cetera. And then I just heard this caveat of like, yeah, unless they're a narcissist, right? And as a collective, we have swung to the end of the spectrum where narcissist became our favorite word. And everyone that brought up emotional discomfort in us or didn't meet our expectations was now a narcissist. And I think we're starting to peel ourselves away from that collectively as a society and learn, okay, maybe not everyone who upsets me is a narcissist, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but there is this, I think, still targeted lack of compassion towards narcissists because they are generally seen as people who just do things to hurt other people. Like they don't have empathy, they don't care about other people's well-being, like genuinely do not care about other people's well-being. They lack uh, that very important human side of empathy, right? Um, and therefore, I think that a lot of people, even people that do see genuine value in being a compassionate, forgiving person, struggle to offer that to narcissists. And I think that's when we're talking about where's the line, how do we define like when we're compassionate versus when we're not, or when we hold people accountable versus when we do. I think when it comes to people with narcissistic personality disorder who have narcissistic traits, we tend to be harder on them because it feels justified, because we actually see that what they're doing is malicious. At least that's how we're seeing it. And we don't have an ability to have compassion for someone who just blatantly lacks it themselves.
It's such a hard one. I'm thinking right now, like, where is my line? And my line is people that are like really abusive, um, in all different shapes and forms. And it would be really difficult to look at someone who's committed atrocities like that and
Yeah.
forgive them. But at the same time, are they also dealing with some chemical or mental imbalance that I'm not
Yeah.
aware of that is creating that way of operating? Probably. Um, and so, what would forgiveness for something like that look like? Could be a really interesting question. And I don't know what the answer is, quite frankly. For me, I think I would need to take it case by case on that.
Definitely. Yeah. But
I,
I think coming back to this ability to relate and bring people down to a human level still applies here, because when we were looking earlier at like how do I forgive someone for something that they've done, being able to see that they were doing the best that they knew how to do given the circumstances and what they grew up with, et cetera, brings us that compassionate view where we can then offer acceptance and forgiveness for what they did. Now, that tends to be harder with narcissism. I want to offer that. Very recently, I was listening to a podcast. I'm fairly certain it was Sex Talk Radio, like sex talk, but SEGGS talk radio. And she was interviewing a psychologist, and they had a very brief discussion about narcissism. And it really stuck out to me because she gave a perspective on narcissistic personality disorder that felt like it like put into words what I intuitively felt must be true, because I had a really hard time believing that there were people in the world that just were actually bad and malicious. Like I have this really strong belief system that humanity and human beings are innately really good and compassionate and loving. Like we're just I genuinely believe that. And there was like a gap where it's like, are narcissists because they're lacking that empathy? Are they the exception to the rule? And I didn't know how to answer that, but it felt wrong. And she gave this insight, and she's a psychologist. I don't know exactly where this is coming from for sure, but it felt right to me that people with narcissistic personality disorder have so much shame,
shame. Yeah.
so much shame.
Yeah.
The only way that they have learned how to process it, because they haven't learned any other tools, etc., is to put themselves on a pedestal and put themselves above other people and not think about other people as a result of that.
Yeah, I actually did know that. I
Yeah,
wasn't sure how, again, this is outside of my scope, so I don't know how to navigate this kind of thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a similar concept going on with most of these people who are committing these atrocities, where there's some degree of self-loathing or shame going on there,
yeah,
and they don't know how to process it, and this is how they do it, and that they're operating from an emotional place. It's not that they're bad, it's that they quite frankly don't know how else to be.
yeah,
And you could also look at that from the spiritual perspective too, which tends to be the perspective that I hold, which is that
yeah,
we come here beings of love, and we're kind of dealt a hand that we on some level choose in order to have that experience, and that we're not bad inherently. We're just flawed in our capacity to show up in certain ways. This reminds me of a really, really incredible story that I read about on this topic of narcissism, of this brain scientist who was studying psychopaths, and he found out that he was one as he was studying them. And what his research found out was that you can be a clinically diagnosed psychopath, but if you have a very loving upbringing, then that isn't going to be, I guess, manifested through
violence.
action. Yes,
Yeah,
through violence. Thank you. And that was the case for him. His upbringing was a very compassionate one, and he did have vindictiveness that he was aware of, but he never took it out in a physical way on anybody. And that's what that research showed. And there is a nature versus nurture situation going on here, which I think has come up with a lot of serial killers, actually. Yeah, I thought that that was fascinating.
that is so fascinating. Oh, I love psychology.
Yeah. This took a turn that I didn't expect, but
Same.
coming back to my line, I I I do think it's a case by case basis for me, and the way I go about forgiveness in those cases is to forgive the person behind the action and to see them through a compassionate lens while also holding um, that what they did was a bad thing to do and a wrong thing to do, and that they caused pain, and that depending on the circumstance, that they probably do need to pay the time, to have, pay their dues for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I I think I agree with you, and I'm still curious what is true about like how much does punishment work? And can we get
I know.
or a different,
I
the same
know.
or a better outcome in a different, and see, I don't know, but I'm curious of that. And I
I
have my
think
suspicions.
I think that it's never it's always helpful to provide somebody with help.
Yeah.
I mean, when is that not
And
going to be
love.
exact? Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like professional help and in a loving way, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if that person needs to be separated for the safety of everyone around them,
Sure.
then that's what I mean.
Sure. And so if we take this away from serial killers for a moment and come back to come back to cancel culture, people that have like just said silly things online that maybe
Yes,
offended some people, is removing the platform. I guess that there might be cases where it's like, well, if we don't remove the platform, they're going to continue hurting people, possibly, or offending people or causing problems. And I mean, like,
I had a strong reaction to that.
what was your reaction to that? I'm
I
curious.
rolled my eyes when you said, when, who are we to remove somebody's platform
Right. Right.
because we're critical of how they're showing up?
Right. Well, I
And
mean, that is an opportunity for projection work, but nobody knows that. Like, if you're offended by something that someone is saying or doing, like, look at yourself, maybe.
yeah, like I do understand if someone is out there saying very hurtful things and
Hmm.
you have gone through painful experiences throughout your life, and here you are faced once more with someone reflecting back to you all of the pain that you've experienced and what you've had to overcome, feeling like it's constantly a hurdle that you can't get over, like that must be so
So
incredibly
hard.
challenging and frustrating. And I want to put that out there that I am and we are acknowledging that. But
Yeah.
there's also opportunity here that serves everybody when we can begin to look at it through this compassionate lens. It's not giving a pass for them to be hurtful. It is relieving you of your own pain and discomfort so that if someone is saying hurtful things, it bounces right off you. You're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore.
Yeah.
And it's also providing an opportunity for those people to learn and to grow and to transcend their previously more limited way of operating.
I think I just discovered in real time where my line is when it
Oh,
comes to online presence and like what I deem as worthy of cancellation. But I want to explore it in real time quickly because I
okay.
think like applying what we just talked about, I think that it just automatically this is like, oh yeah, he deserves to have his platform removed. I forget his name, but it's that guy that's like all teaching young boys how to be an alpha male.
I don't want to say his name. I know who
Yeah,
you're
fair
talking about.
enough. Everyone knows who we're
Yeah.
talking about. Obviously, creating a lot of harm in the world to women, to little boys, to just like the humanity and like the progression that we're like, it just seems like it's obvious what's happening as a result of this guy's platform. It's not just people getting offended, it's like people are taking his advice and doing harmful things with it. I feel like that's where I saw where my line was just now.
Yeah, he's full of shame, that guy.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that there's also something inside of this for me where when you can see that they are authentically sorry and they
Mm,
really want to change, I think that that's where I it's so much easier for me to forgive
Yeah.
and to like fully forgive because you can tell when that's the case. For that individual, it didn't seem like it, but there are others on the cancellation list currently who I see genuinely really have changed and see a more compassionate lens to see the world themselves. And so who am I to withhold that from them too? Like when they're offering it to me genuinely,
Yeah.
how can you close your heart to that?
Can we just end on the note, on that note of like closing your heart? Like it, when you're closing your heart to someone, that only hurts you. I remember hearing that before, and it like woke me up, like it shook me for a moment, and it feels so true to me that like if I'm closing my heart off to someone, if I'm telling myself they're wrong or they don't deserve forgiveness or they're bad or I'm closing my heart to someone because I feel like, they hurt me or whatever, like that hurts me. It doesn't do anything for them directly, really. It only directly influences how I am experiencing myself and my reality. And I love how you put that, like, who am I to close my heart to that person? And I think keeping our heart open is a practice of being willing to see the humanness and the genuine intention behind everything and being willing to vouch for people's goodness more than their wrongness or their badness and being more committed to proving that people are genuinely good than you are to proving that people are bad.
Love that. Would you like to end it there, or is there anything else on your heart that you want to say about this?
That felt like my mic drop moment.
Okay.
So I'm
Let's
gonna
end
leave it there.
let's end it there.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for listening and for watching, and we'll speak to you soon.